Hello and welcome to Lamplighter. Today is June 10. Today in our daily Bible reading, we begin with the story of King Jehoram, who is struck ill by God with an incurable disease of the bowels. Now, this shouldn't surprise us because if you remember from yesterday's reading, Jehoram had received this mysterious letter from Elijah, who had long since been taken up into heaven in a whirlwind. But somehow this letter is delivered to Jehoram, predicting the invasion by foreign armies, which we've already seen happen, and predicting Jehoram's incurable disease of the bowels with which the Lord afflicts him at the beginning of the reading today. We move on then to Israel, and we start to see that the king of Syria, or sometimes called the king of Aram, is wanting to wage war against the king of Israel. But Elisha keeps telling the king of Israel where the king of Syria is, and so he's always able to exert the right amount of caution and not be where he can be attacked. Well, the king of Syria gets angry and he thinks that maybe there's someone on his side that's being disloyal, a traitor among his soldiers. And so he says, who keeps telling the king of Israel where we're going, so that he's always prepared and goes somewhere else? And finally, one of his men say to him, it's none of us, O king, that are being disloyal. But you see, Elisha, the prophet of God, is with the king of Israel, and it's Elisha who keeps telling him where we're going. Well, when the king of Syria hears this, he wants to destroy Elisha. And I want to direct your attention to page 730 of our reading today, where the king says, go and find out where he is so I can send some men and capture him. So they find out that he's in Dothan, and the king is ready to send some soldiers there. We pick up the reading under Syrians blinded on page 730. They went by night and they surrounded the city. Now, when the servant of the man of God got up and went out early the next morning, an army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. Oh, my Lord, what shall we do? The servant asked. I love this. Don't be afraid, the prophet answered. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. Think how strange that must have sounded to Elisha's servant. He looks out and he sees their camp is completely surrounded by the enemy forces, but he doesn't see any of his own. And then we read this. Elisha prayed, O Lord, open his eyes so that he may see. Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked and saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. Elisha prayed that his eyes be opened and he see what Elisha sees. What a marvelous demonstration of God's presence and power. As the enemy came down toward him, Elisha prayed to the Lord, strike these people with blindness. So he struck them with blindness as Elisha had asked. So when they get there, now they've been stricken blind. And it's almost like an old cartoon where Elisha says, he went that way, and points the other direction. They're blinded, so they can't see who it is that's giving them directions. And Elisha leads them to Samaria. The soldiers get to Samaria. Then Elisha prays graciously that their eyes be opened. When the soldiers' eyes are open, they see that they're in Samaria and don't even really know how they got there. The Samaritans are not sure what to do with them. They ask, should we kill them? Should we imprison them? And Elisha basically says, no, they've done you no harm. Just send them back home peacefully. So they go back home peacefully, and as you might imagine, Aram, or Syria, is very hesitant to attack again, and so that kind of puts a peaceful end to this would-be battle. Then we read of the Shunammite woman, once again, who, remember, had been sent away by Elisha because of the famine. She has come back and she approaches the king, and she has her land and home restored to her. Then we start reading about Naaman. You're probably familiar with Naaman. He is a great commander in the Syrian army. The problem is he has leprosy. He has a little servant girl in his household from Israel who is aware of Elisha, the man of God, and she says to Naaman if he would go and consult with Elisha, Elisha could probably heal his leprosy. So Naaman goes to the king of Aram or Syria to get permission to go to Israel to seek help from the man of God. The king of Aram says, "Not only will I send you with my blessings, I'll send you with a letter to the king of Israel." Well, this letter kind of humorously says from one king to the other, "I'm sending my great commander to you so you can heal him of his leprosy." Well, the king of Israel reads this letter. He is incensed. He tears his robes and he says, "Why is he trying to stir up trouble? I'm not able to heal this man of his leprosy. He's just trying to pick a fight with me." Well, when Elisha gets word that the king has torn his robes, he says, "Send Naaman to me and I'll take care of it." So Naaman comes to Elisha's house and he's expecting some great demonstration of the power of God, but Elisha doesn't even make contact with him. Elisha sends a servant to the door. Naaman is there with all his pomp and circumstance. He's there with all of his gifts and treasures, ready to give them to Elisha. But he's greeted only by a servant with this message: "If you go dip in the river Jordan 7 times, you'll be healed." Well, this makes Naaman angry. He's far too important to only be greeted by a servant. Why would Elisha not at least come out and wave his hand or do something dramatic? And by the way, if I'm going to go dip in the water, Naaman thinks, there are far cleaner and better waters back home than this dirty Jordan River. Why would I ever do that? And as he's steaming, some of his servants come to him and say, if the man of God had asked you to do anything, you would do it to get rid of your leprosy, wouldn't you? So why not do this simple task? Well, he listens to their wise counsel, and Naaman goes to the river Jordan and dips 7 times, and his leprosy is healed. And he's so overwhelmed, he goes back to the house of Elisha and wants to praise him and praise his God. And he says this thing: "Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel." He wants to reward Elisha with all these gifts he has brought. Elijah says, "No, I don't want you to give me anything." And the implication here is Elisha wants to make sure that Naaman knows he was not healed by Elisha, but by the hand of God. It is God who deserves the gifts, and God has already received Naaman's gift of praise when he said, "Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel." So Naaman is sent on his way, and unfortunately for Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, he has overheard this conversation. He thinks his master has let Naaman off far too easily, so he pursues him. And he comes up to Naaman, and Naaman wonders what's wrong. And Gehazi says, "Well, just after you left, some unexpected guests came, and now my master needs clothing and money to help provide for them." And so Naaman graciously gives Gehazi not only what he asks, but even more than what he asks. And so Gehazi takes it back and hides it. And just about the time he has it hidden, Elisha comes to him and says, "Where have you been, Gehazi?" And Elisha is well aware of everything that Gehazi has just done. He's not able to get away with it. He's not able to fool God or even the servant of God, Elisha. And so Elisha says to Gehazi, "Because of this action on your part, the leprosy that Naaman had will now be on you." And so Gehazi becomes a leper himself. We read of the second siege of Samaria, this time by Ben-Hadad, the king of Aram. We read about the famine that's bringing such suffering that there are even mothers who are eating their children to survive. And this makes the king of Aram so angry that he says he's going to take off Elisha's head. As he's coming, he sends messengers ahead, and Elisha says to them, "Tomorrow, by this very time, everything is going to be so dramatically different that the economy is going to be turned upside down, and it's going to be a time of plenty." Well, there's one messenger who doesn't believe that, is skeptical, says that could never happen, especially in such a short amount of time. Then we read about a group of lepers who are struggling from the famine, and they say, "If we're going to survive, let's go over to the Aramean camp and join them. At least we can have something to eat." Well, when they go to the Aramean camp, they discover that God has caused the Arameans to hear sounds of horses and chariots. They think they're being attacked, And so they leave their camp. All their plunder is there. All their clothing, their tents, their animals, their food, everything is left there. The lepers discover it. They keep it for themselves at first, and then they say to themselves, this is a day of good news, and we are keeping it to ourselves. Let's share it with our fellow townspeople. So they go back and tell those back home what they've discovered. Some messengers are sent out to make sure it's not a trap. It's not a trap. This is the hand of God once again. And they take all the plunder, bring it back into the land. And as a result, the economy is turned completely upside down, just as Elisha had predicted. And the messenger who had doubted it, the people are so excited as they come back with all the plunder from this Aramean camp that they trample him in the gates. So he saw it, just as the prophet predicted, but he never got to eat of it. It's amazing the hand of God that we've seen all the way through today's reading. And that shouldn't surprise us either, because remember, the story is about God. It's a marvelous story. We serve a great and a wonderful God who is to always be praised. Isn't it great to be a lamplighter? His word is a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. I hope you have a blessed day.